Ora bem, hoje vamos fazer aqui um vídeo que é um react dos últimos vídeos do Gamers Nexus, e eu achei interessante vir falar nele porque é sobre um assunto que é muito pertinente atualmente, mas que há uns anos atrás já tinha acontecido algo parecido, que é a questão de que a gente considera o cartel, e para quem muita gente sabe, pode ser o cartel dos bancos, dos supermercados, pode ser das bombas de combustível, pode ser aplicado em muitos casos. Nestes casos, aqui uns anos atrás, foram os fabricantes dos chips que foram apanhados pelo governo americano, pela entidade que eles têm lá, que, ao contrário do resto do mundo, eles tinham trabalho, ok? E aplicou-lhes multas pesadíssimas, num setor de 300, no outro for 400 milhões de dólares, ok? E vocês vão ver o vídeo todo. Este é um vídeo grande, eu vou pôr aquilo ligeiramente acelerado para não se perder muito tempo. Não sei se vou conseguir fazer tudo na mesma sessão, porque a minha ideia era ter dividir este vídeo em duas. Portanto, daquilo que já passou antigamente, se calhar é isso que eu vou fazer, e depois o segundo vídeo será do sistema mais atual. Acho que é isso. A ver se eu me lembro de parar a live. Ok? Maltinha, vamos então colocar aqui isto disponível. Vamos fazer um react aqui então ao Gamers Nexus. Pá. Eu aconselho-vos também a irem ver o canal dele, porque ele merece. Ok? Vai aqui a tentar colocar. Ok. Penso que está tudo. Vamos então.
And now you guys don't have the courage to increase contract pricing. All in all, I'm not too impressed. So if you don't mind, we will. Let's talk by phone. Tell me where and when, and I'll look into it. Give Lynn a raise. He has single-handedly raised the DRAM price throughout the US and the world. A rogue player can keep the DRAM business on thin ice. End quote. This is what the memory makers said when organizing competing manufacturers to intentionally and artificially constrict output to maintain elevated prices for consumers.
Estas conversas, isto é já no lawsuit que o governo americano fez, foram conversas que eles conseguiram apanhar nas escutas entre eles próprios das marcas a discutirem o assunto. Por isso aí não tinham para onde fugir, ok? Tenham muito atento, depois vejam depois o vídeo se vocês quiserem. Eu pus aqui as legendas para muita gente, mas o ideal era ouvirem bem.
And thus they initiated what the DOJ eventually declared was, quote, one of the largest cartels ever discovered.
O DOJ é o tal entidade que cai em cima dos gajos com um martelo pesado, ok?
End quote.
Mostrar as empresas foram Samsung, Hynix e a primeira que era, está atrás,
prices for consumers. And thus they initiated what the DOJ eventually declared was, quote,
estão a ver aqui, 84 milhões foi neste, e pagaram, é que já pagaram.
largest cartel
Logo.
ever discovered. End quote.
Não esquecer, isto foi em 2006. Por isso é que eu digo que são dois esquemas diferentes, ok? Micron. Estes gajos tiveram sempre, ok? Viram o que é que a Micron fez neste sistema agora, né? Mandou-nos um pontapé no cu, acabou com a Crucial e vazou para a inteligência artificial.
Good afternoon. The detection and prosecution of criminal cartel.
Não esquecer, isto foi naquele ano então, do primeiro caso, do cartel. Foi aí que eles rotularam preto no branco as coisas. Acho que isto é 2002, e depois entre 2002 e 2006, acho eu.
Highest priority of the Antitrust Division. We are committed to bringing to justice the international cartels that victimize American consumers.
Assistente Attorney General, portanto isto é o Big Boss nos Estados Unidos naquela altura, naquele tempo. Eles lá não brincam, ok?
And businesses. Today we are announcing a significant enforcement action in the division's fight against illegal cartels. Samsung Electronics Company, a Korean manufacturer
Samsung,
of dynamic random access memory products, or DRAM products, and its U.S. subsidiary, Samsung Semiconductor, have agreed to plead
esta é a parte,
a $300 million
porque a Samsung tem dois departamentos, da Coreia do Sul e depois o outro que é nos Estados Unidos. É normal fazer isso. Ele já vai dizer aqui o valor que eles pagaram. Eles que pagaram.
for
300 milhões. É que lá não há conversa. É que esta entidade fecha a empresa e acabou. Tu não pagas, fecha a empresa, vende tudo. Que é que há conversa.
in an illegal price fixing cartel in the
Naquela altura foi, eles faziam, por isso é que se chama cartel, né? Combinavam entre eles os preços. Ok? E isso é proibido.
DRAM market.
There's no organic reason for prices to increase, wrote Al-Qaeda. Micron said, quote, although there is some increase
Pronto, estamos a falar do ano 2002. Não façam confusão. Porque este esquema que estamos a falar foi já em 2002. Portanto, estas empresas todas que agora entraram nesta brincadeira de inteligência artificial já deviam ter sido fechadas naquela altura. Acabou. Acabou. Agora desculpa, estamos a fazer fabricar para os chips de inteligência artificial. Então, que treta do caralho. Vamos ver se eles não descobrem também conversas, mensagens e telefone.
in demand, it's modest compared to the capacity throttling, end quote. In the cartel's first year, from 1998 to 1999, Hyundai, Samsung, and Micron increased their collective share from 40% to 61%, signifying the first time the big three held majority power. They used this position to screw consumers and elevate prices.
Eles já naquela altura eram as três empresas que dominavam quase toda a produção. E o que o Gamers Next também diz aqui, foi graças a isto que eles fizeram, que foi quando eles conseguiram acabar com o resto de quem supostamente também fabricava. Então, e por isso é que eu digo que na altura em quando eles foram processados e pagaram aqueles valores astronómicos, o próprio governo ia ter dito, não, vocês agora têm que se mexer e trazer outras empresas para o vosso lado. Porque no fundo o que ia acontecer é que eles depois iam abafar essas pequenas empresas também. Esse é que é o problema.
Increasing their profit margins.
Samsung and its co-conspirators fixed the price of DRAM used in computers. DRAM is the most commonly used semiconductor memory product and accounts for billions of dollars in U.S. sales. Samsung is the third semiconductor manufacturer to agree to plead guilty to fixing DRAM prices.
E eles tiveram que assumir que fizeram isso. É como eu digo, nos Estados Unidos eles têm muitos problemas, mas nestas coisas, quando eles apanham o gajo com as calças na mão, tu vais ter que te pôr de joelhos ou então vais logo de vela. Ok? E acho que foram 2 ou 3 que ficaram presos mesmo.
Previously, Hynix Semiconductor pled guilty and paid and was fined $185 million.
Este foi o outro,
Also
foi 185, e agora o Infineon também levou outra.
guilty and was fined $160 million
Este levou 160 milhões.
for their roles in the same price-fixing conspiracy.
At least 15 manufacturers, basically the
Aqui.
DRAM industry, participated in the price-fixing conspiracy. Over 117 employees from the 5 largest manufacturers alone were involved. Several
Mas para quem não sabe, ele depois também fala aqui nisto, mas eu vou já falar noutro assunto. Nos Estados Unidos, eles criaram um fundo, aquela empresa que faz este tipo de porradas, lá fazem sempre isso. Quando punem alguém porque fez este tipo de esquemas, depois é criado um outro fundo em que quem quiser tem que provar que comprei. Eu comprei também as memórias, ou comprei... Na altura também estavam incluídos quem comprasse, acho que era impressoras, porque também tinha DRMs, não é? As memórias, aquelas impressoras, especialmente as impressoras profissionais. Tinhas depois de provar que tiveste então que compraste dentro daquele prazo e tu vais receber dinheiro. Atenção a esse pormenor, ok? Atenção.
of whom remained employed after the cartel's discovery, or were even promoted to powerful positions
Mas
post.
isto é que eu não admito, ok? Portanto, todos os gajos que foram apanhados naquela altura, neste caso da Samsung, tinham que ter ido todos para o olho da rua, acabou, e nunca mais durante 5 ou 10 anos pudessem estar em empresas neste tipo de posição, CEOs, diretores, o correio que os parta. Isso aí é que eles falharam, porque por lei eles não podem aplicar isso, mas então mudassem a lei. Porque aqui não estamos a falar de meia dúzia de dólares, estamos a falar de milhões de dólares, só de multa, fora o dinheiro que os gajos ganharam.
Cartel collapsed, although some ended up in jail. The memory maker Cartel exchanged prices weekly, synchronized supply reductions at the same time as Hynix was set to receive a $7 billion bailout to salvage its failing business, resulting in a bout of deja vu and anti-dumping tariffs. The cartel enforced coordinated price floors, rigged online auctions, artificially inflated prices, and then lied about why prices were inflated by pointing at falsified demand. They explicitly attempted to conceal conversations and even formed factions within the cartel to kill off weaker cartel members. Then, it all came crashing down.
Today, we are charging that Samsung conspired with Hynix, Infineon, and other unnamed co-conspirators to fix the price of DRAM sold to certain computer and server manufacturers.
And if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that it repeats.
Isto é que hoje vamos falar do
Over 20 years ago,
mais recente.
circular actions and collaborative competition to damage consumers has a lot of parallels to today.
By conspiring to drive up the price of DRAM, Samsung and its co-conspirators forced consumers to pay more for these products. In fact, during certain periods of the conspiracy, Dell and Apple publicly announced that due to the increase in DRAM prices, they were forced to raise the price of their PC computer products to consumers. Other computer manufacturers dealt with the increased prices by reducing the amount of DRAM products in their computers. One manufacturer announced that the increase in DRAM prices caused it to offer computers for sale at the same price as previous models, but with less memory. This case demonstrates the need for vigorous antitrust enforcement in high technology markets, which is one of the most important sectors of the American economy.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
Não esquecer que isto foi há mais de 20 anos, ok? E a porcaria continua. E tem que ser tomadas outras medidas, pá.
In this video, we'll look at the memory manufacturers of exotic locations for a history lesson, coming from Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and, the most exotic of them all, Boise. All to understand the DRAM price-fixing cartel that seems to pop up once a decade in a deep dive history of it. With this video, we're launching our brand new Wireframe V2 mouse mat, and we're sponsoring ourselves with
Isto aqui é a publicidade deles, vocês vejam no vídeo dele. Portanto, isto aqui então era o mercado e hoje em dia é exatamente a mesma coisa. São 3 produtores mundiais de RAMs, a Micron, a Hynix e a Samsung. Depois são aqui uns pequeninos, agora até acho que até são mais, mas são sempre assim este volume baixíssimo, ok?
thanks to their collusion decades ago that knocked out smaller competition. The memory industry has existed for decades now. It wasn't always comprised of the enormous, highly automated fabrication plants consisting of machines worth billions of dollars per fab. In fact, some of the oldest memory was literally woven by hand.
Olha como é que se fazia os módulos. Ai, Jesus. Pá, tinha que ser manualmente. Vejam, isto é esquema como era na altura.
We even have a block of old core memory on our studio wall.
It was called rope memory.
You actually had to send the program to a factory, and women in the factory would literally weave the software into this core rope.
Foi assim que começou
Rings and wires.
o fabrico dos chips, das DRAM, os básicos iniciais.
It was extremely slow. One program could take several months to weave, and if there was an error, it was a nightmare to correct.
Coisa destes mal colocado.
You just saw as a clip of the hand-weaving process of a giant piece of memory used in the Apollo missions. Hand-weaving memory was a complicated process, but as time went on, a process that already seemed complicated, using toroids of ferrites to store literal bits of data, became even more complicated. Memory today requires...
Esta é uma das fábricas da Micron que está a fazer nos Estados Unidos, como eles disseram que queriam fazer 9 fábricas, acho eu. Eu falei no outro dia no vídeo. Está aí no vídeo.
Facilities worth sometimes tens of billions
Agora já não sei.
to manufacture. The land area is enormous. Ceiling-mounted carrier pods whisk silicon wafers from point to point, helping move them from one multi-million-dollar machine to another, minimizing machine downtime to maximize output and profit. But it wasn't always so complicated. A fabrication plant popped up in Boise, Idaho from Micron in 1980, preceding its IPO in 1984 at a share price of $14 versus $412 today. Samsung developed 64 kilobit DRAM in 1983, broke ground in Gyeongju, Korea, moved to 256 kilobit DRAM by 1984 with its first fabrication line.
Evolução das memórias.
1 megabit in 1986, quadrupled to 4 megabit by 1988, and set in motion what it is
Agora já falámos em gigas.
known as SK Hynix built its Fab 2A in 1984 and ran its pilot production line of 16K SRAM. By 1985, the future SK Hynix group had begun shipping 16K SRAM and mass
256 capas.
produced quickly, eventually developing something else alongside technology: greed. And eventually, a criminal operation. US-based Micron claimed in 1986 that Japanese manufacturers were dumping 64K DRAM, or exporting 64K N-channel metal oxide semiconductors at predatory pricing. Shortly after, Micron decided it was actually the South Korean companies who were dumping. Quote, the US government ruled in favor of the Boise company last week on its complaint that South Koreans were selling their chips in the United States at unfairly low prices, wrote the Lewiston Morning Tribune in 1993. Later, Micron argued that, actually, it was Taiwan dumping. Quote, prices for chips began plummeting in September 1995 and have remained low ever since, end quote, wrote a follow-up piece.
O esquema já vem de anos e anos atrás.
Then, Taiwan got in on the action, claiming Micron was actually the one dumping. Quote, Taiwan's Ministry of Finance is investigating dumping charges brought by the Taiwan Semiconductor Industry Association against U.S. chip giant Micron Technology, end quote, they wrote in 1999, next to an advertisement for a case of 48 tins of mac and cheese for $12. Inflation hits hard. According to the memory makers, everybody dumps. Normally, that's on the consumers. But in those first 2 decades, it was on each other. The manufacturers were well on their way to a corruption scandal, even back in 1983. But unlike today's cooperative competition, at least the constantly alleged dumping of underpriced chips during the prior 30 years benefited consumers. As described in the DRAM antitrust litigation's expert report of Roger G. Knoll, one SK Hynix email reported that Samsung, quote, pulled a sneaky by not raising its price to Dell, end quote.
Are we going sneaky beaky like? No.
An email from competitor Infineon states, quote, I talked to Dieter from Samsung. Samsung will proceed to take market share and making life difficult for all weaker competitors, end quote. An internal Micron email read, quote, I also think now is the time to do everything in our power to make it very difficult for Hynix to get that so badly needed cash, end quote. And when Micron and Samsung couldn't drive out smaller competition,
Estas conversas que eles conseguiram apanhar,
with the report writing that a
e que serviu de acusação.
and Hynix put forth a major effort to end the price war, end quote. An email thread between Infineon and Samsung sales executives from that month read, Infineon, you couldn't finish off Hynix, and now you guys don't have the courage to increase contract pricing. All in all, I'm not too impressed, so if you don't mind, we will. Samsung, let's talk by phone. Let me know where and when, and I will look into it, end quote. The same day, an employee from yet another memory manufacturer, Alpida, reported that Samsung intended to raise prices to Dell, signaling its return to the cartel. This sounds familiar in contemporary media.
My business, all of our businesses, this infighting's costing money.
I'm willing to move forward. Let the past be bygones.
And it worked. During a successful period, one conversation from Alpida read, quote, give Lin a raise. He has single-handedly raised the DRAM price throughout the US and the world. Another quote, give a little credit to the boys in Seoul, too, end quote. Colluding against consumers to artificially raise prices isn't a bad end to January for the memory makers.
45, 50, 60,000.
It's gonna be a good summer.
In fact, the collusion was so normalized that one manufacturer even bragged about the price fixing to Taipei Times, publicly stating, quote, we're trying to encourage a price of $3 US. That's the consensus, end quote. With the Taipei Times reporting in its
A vergonha chegou mesmo.
DRAM spot prices had
Já chegava naquela altura, assim.
some weak uplift by
Por isso é que eu digo, estas regras deviam ter sido aumentadas.
president said, quote, you don't need to have a meeting. You just need to have a phone call. Everybody knows each other. We just said, try not to sell below $3, end quote. Another quote from the same article cites an
E também tivemos supermercados, não é? A fazer cartel.
style cartel in this business is limited, end quote. It's always reassuring to have your business compared to OPEC, which hasn't ever had controversies, of course.
Did you hear what I said? Don't buy anything, don't get anything, nothing big. Did you hear what I said? What's the matter with you? What are you getting excited for? What am I getting excited about? Because you're gonna get us all fucking pinched, that's why. What are you, stupid? What's the matter with you? I apologize. What's the matter with you? sorry. The fuck is the matter with you?
O pormenor que eles fazem nesses vídeos é brutal.
Investigation commenced the following month.
Aconselho,
2002. But this was going to be an uphill
Espera aqui.
battle for Washington. These are seasoned.
aconselho a irem ao Gamers Next ver este vídeo, ok?
Convicting SK Hynix wouldn't be easy. It's not like the company would just openly admit to breaking and remaking the rules.
When the world sets limits, we break and remake the rules.
Okay, but it's not like they admit that they break the rules twice in one marketing video or state that they're rule breakers.
This is why we continue to break the rules. By challenging the status quo and taking risks, we create a culture of innovation. We are rule breakers. We do technology. SK Hynix.
Moving on. Fine. But convicting the other firms wouldn't prove easy. Or it wouldn't have. Up until Micron applied for the DOJ's corporate leniency policy. Turns out the Micron
Pois, este foi outro problema. Já estamos a falar aqui em 2025. Foi que a Micron foi a correr a pedir esmolas ao governo americano e os gajos deram-lhe 200 bilhões. É isso me conta, mano. Ver aqui. A Micron, nós vamos investir 200 bilhões aqui nos Estados Unidos e tal. E o Trump caiu na esparrela. Pá, empresas que fazem dumping não podem ser nunca mais na vida ajudadas. Ponto. O que é que nós temos? E depois tenho aqui um texto do Trump.
And it actually goes way back. The DOJ granted Micron amnesty for ratting out its partners.
Deu-lhe amnistia. Ok? Micron agreed to cooperative investigation to a chance for amnesty for federal crime charge. Pá, não não aceitável isto. Não aceitável.
Before a federal grand jury ruled against them, the DOJ fined Samsung, SK Hynix, Infineon, and Al-Qaeda a collective $731 million for price fixing between 1998 and 2002.
731 milhões.
$1 million in criminal fines is the second highest total obtained by the Department of Justice in a criminal antitrust investigation into a specific industry. There were approximately $7.7 billion in DRAM sales in the United States alone.
A venda dos gajos, 7,7 bilhões só nos Estados Unidos, em 2004. Claro que lhes compensa fazer aqueles esquemas, mesmo sendo apanhados, e pagar multas de 700 milhões. Os gajos vendem 7,7 bilhões. É isso. Por isso é que eu digo, em todo o mundo, quando a multa compensa.
In 2004, end quote. The ruling referenced the Sherman Antitrust Act, passed in 1890, stating the maximum penalty of 3 years in prison and a $350,000 fine for the individuals convicted. 6 Samsung staff, 4 Hynix staff, 1 Al-Qaeda executive, and 4 Infineon staff were sentenced to a range of 4 to 14 months, some with leniency, and 1 Micron staffer was sentenced to house arrest. In the DOJ's final DRAM investigation press release that we could find publicly archived, it stated, quote, a third defendant charged in the October 2006 indictment, a Korean national and the vice president of sales and marketing for Samsung's memory division, remains at large, end quote. We dug into this further and found absolutely zero additional information on the VP or any legal resolutions, but we wouldn't be surprised if the VP still works at Samsung under a different name. And so, the original cooperative DRAM empire fell. But with the fall of the old order, there arose a new one. Besides, it's easier to keep a secret among 3 companies rather than 15. The foundation was set for Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron's current market dominance, achieving the secondary...
São sempre os 3 juntos, estes gajos. Sempre.
Wouldn't be an issue, because several participants remained employed. In fact, Infineon's involved VP has since been promoted to an executive vice president, and still works at the company as we write this. Samsung's associate director of marketing stayed until 2025, and became a corporate executive vice president. SK Hynix's SVP remained until 2025 as SVP. Micron's...
outra coisa que eu dizia que estes CEOs da altura desta situação tinham que ser todos demitidos, expulsos da empresa. Pá. Eu acho que isto foi um erro daquela situação, de eles terem permitido isto.
Once again, proof that fines for the rich are just convenience fees to fast-track success. To understand how the manufacturers got to 95%, we need to start from the inception of the DRAM industry, accented with a backdrop of manufacturers illegally dumping chips below cost and pushes for market share, the first cartel allegations, the US-Japan trade war, and major consolidations. We'll start from the beginning.
Vai fazer a história do circuito circuitos integrados, para muita gente que nunca viu. Vejam.
That was experiencing unprecedented growth during the 1950s was the vacuum tube business. Computers gobbled up vacuum tubes as fast as the manufacturers could turn them out. But the vacuum tube boom was about to come to an
Era as válvulas. Eu cheguei a ter televisões de válvulas.
abrupt end, thanks to a tiny electronic component that some have called the most important invention of the 20th century.
Depois passou para os transistores, não é? É assim.
The transistor.
Comments on Project Apollo, the United States manned expedition to the moon. I'm Bill Stout. An estimated $30 billion will be required to complete this controversial program before 1970. She also demonstrated further that Russian technology was equal, if not superior, to that of the United States.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Godspeed, John Glenn. Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
1965 foi quando a NASA Apollo teve grandes
Before
projeção.
computers relied on magnetic core memory, which had two types, ferrite and metallic ribbon.
Modern data processing systems like these
Agora vai mostrar aqueles computadores que muita malta de vocês nunca viu, não é? Grandes machines.
use thousands of magnetic cores. These cores are small, rugged, and they consume less power than most of the other devices that are used in these systems. You'll also find magnetic cores in automatic equipment employed for communication, fire control, cryptography, and high-speed computation. What are magnetic cores? They are tiny rings of nickel alloy or other magnetic materials. They have replaced vacuum tubes for many important functions in data processing systems.
In 1962, the United States Army and Department of Defense published this 29-minute part of a multi-part series explaining the properties of magnetic core memory.
Why do we use binary? Because a bit can be represented by any bistable device, and a magnetic core is a bistable device.
The bidirectional magnetism made core memory possible, but ultimately, this type of memory was too labor-intensive to manufacture and had too many limitations. It was a stepping stone to something greater.
In 1967, while working on the development of field effect transistors, Denard discovered a new kind of random access memory called dynamic, or DRAM. It was a breakthrough that would, in a few short years, revolutionize the computer industry.
We found that if we reduced all of the dimensions of this device simultaneously, in all three dimensions, that these much smaller transistors would really work. They would switch on and off cleanly, just like the bigger versions. And then we discovered there were several important advantages, besides being much denser, and therefore, they should be very low cost, that they would also operate faster, and directly in proportion to how small they became.
Denard presented his scaling concept at the International Electronic Devices meeting, along with goals of reducing the gate insulators of the MOS transistors to 200 angstroms. In writing, he recalls the audience laughing, mostly of the belief that sub 1000 angstrom, or 100 nanometers, was impossible.
Throughout the 70s, as DRAM replaced magnetic memory, Denard and his colleagues at IBM continued looking for ways to make computers smaller, denser, and cheaper.
Despite being met with laughs at the conference, not everyone was so quick to dismiss the idea.
71, 79.
Soon will be equipped with a new instructional time-sharing mini-computer, a digital PDP 1145 running the Ristus-E operating system.
Notice the device over there with the blinking colored switches. That's the central processor unit. That device has all the memory and is the unit that actually does your programs. You cannot have enormous arrays to be inverted in real time, at least not in memory. If you do want to have very large arrays, you'll want to check out the virtual array facility, which allows you to have virtually unlimited memory, but it's kept out on disk, and needless to say, it's very slow.
In 1968, Intel was founded as
Intel.
Electronics.
Intel foi criada em 1968, okay?
It was the first major adopter, successfully launching its 1 kilobit or 1K DRAM chip in 1970.
The original 1K DRAM of the 70s doubled in size about every...
Malta que nunca viu, veja. E naquela altura a tecnologia eles conseguiam dobrar o tamanho da capacidade das coisas daquela altura a cada 18 meses, para vocês verem a tecnologia.
16 megabit chips. The advantage of dynamic RAM was its low cost and large size.
By 1972, Intel claims its 1K DRAM had become the best-selling semiconductor memory in the world. The apparent demand for memory attracted other US manufacturers like Texas Instruments, MasTec, Motorola, and even AMD. By 1975, United States firms comprised at least 88% of the 4K memory market, as published by the Institute of Electrical Electronics Engineers, or IEEE. Meanwhile, the DRAM industry also attracted its first foreign competitors.
This is Tokyo. With a population of over 10 million, this is the world's largest, most densely crowded, most rapidly growing city. It is the capital of Japan. Year after year, the Japanese have been able to put more than a quarter of their national income into new investment, into new plants, creating new jobs, new products. Not only have the Japanese learned to produce highly advanced type goods, but equally important, they have proved their ability to sell on fiercely competitive world markets, successfully competing with the most highly developed nations. Heavy industry was in ruins at the end of the Second World War. Now, completely rebuilt, new factories, new equipment, new technology have helped Japan undersell and outproduce other countries, which often...
E o Japão aproveitou a destruição.
Entered the DRAM industry, but lagged behind the US manufacturers' head start. As reported by MIT, to close the technological gap, Fujitsu, Hitachi, Mitsubishi, NEC, and Toshiba formed the VLSI Technology Research Association, a nationally funded R&D group that specialized in manufacturing. The MIT research paper explains, quote, "For this purpose, approximately 70 billion yen, or $288 million US, was spent over the 4 years beginning in fiscal 1976. And that's the currency conversion for the time, not adjusted for today. By 1979, a study prepared for Congress's Joint Economic Committee noted Japan had captured 40% already of the 16K market.
There's a lot of Japan in the United States, certainly quite a bit of it here in San Francisco. Lots of Japanese products, of course, too. But one Japanese export which has not been very successful here has been...
Eu adorava o programa deste senhor, que era de Computer Chronicles.
As we take a look at Japanese computers on this edition of the Computer Chronicles.
Among the new portables, Fujitsu showed a 16-bit machine with a 25...
Gostam deste computador?
column screen. It comes with 128K of random access memory, expandable to 448K.
In 1981, Micron claimed it produced the first 64K DRAM, but by 1982, the New York Times reported that, quote, "the Japanese companies hold about 70% of the market, according to DataQuest Incorporated," end quote. But yields were a problem. The New York Times noted, quote, "Texas Instruments first tried to produce the 64K chips at its plant in Lubbock, Texas. According to industry executives and others, the rejection rate at the Lubbock plant was too high. Consequently, much of Texas Instruments' production of 64K chips was transferred to Miho, where the results have been markedly improved. And so, Japan took over the 80s, led by Hitachi, NEC, and Toshiba, for 64K, 256K, and 1 megabit DRAM.
The Japanese have certainly come a long way in the last decade. 10 years ago, they were not a significant factor in the integrated circuit business, and today we could consider them a very worthy competitor, especially in the memory area. The Japanese, I think it's well known that they have excellent manufacturing capability, and they also have excellent capital formation, which gives them a significant competitive edge over our industry in the United States. The response, at least from Advanced Micro Devices, and I believe it's characteristic of the industry, is to be very innovative in the products that we build, so that we expect that the new products that we introduce will allow us to maintain profitability in our industry.
The New York Times revealed that Texas Instruments had to close plants after its $516 million operating profit in 1984 fell to negative $61 million in the following year. Intel ended DRAM production, turning towards microprocessors instead. Intel's 1985 post wrote, quote, "With 256K DRAMs now selling at less than $3, it seems unlikely that we would attain an acceptable level of profitability in higher density products," end quote. Intel wrote to employees in 85 that, quote, "DRAMs represented less than 5% of Intel's business this year," end quote. As for another US company, Boise-based Micron was busy accusing the Japanese manufacturers of dumping 64K DRAM, or selling chips below what it would cost the manufacturer to make them, in pushes for market share. In other words, Micron couldn't compete on price, and so it filled petitions to bring government-level oversight instead, just like we've seen with CXMT. According to the New York Times archive of a 1985 newspaper article, trade specialists claimed the Japanese firms lowered prices between 30 to 35 cents per chip, despite costing between 60 and 75 cents to produce. A few months later, US companies Intel and AMD accused Japanese suppliers of dumping EPROMs, or erasable programmable read-only memory chips, in addition to the other claims. Intel CEO Andy Grove reportedly sent a fiddle to Richard Darman of the Reagan administration, suggesting he was, quote, fiddling while the industry burned, end quote, via the LA Times. Now, January 1986, the U.S. Commerce Department determined there was a, quote, reasonable indication that an industry in the United States is materially...
Já havia problemas noutros anos abaixo, com coisas parecidas.
Having a memory capacity of 256 kilobits and above, end quote. And tariffs discussion began. History repeats. In response, President Reagan announced the 1986 Semiconductor Trade Agreement, in which Japan agreed to limit its semiconductor exports, primarily DRAM, and shared 20% of Japan's market with foreign producers. Of course, anybody could guess what happened next. Japan, suddenly limiting production, caused a severe supply shortage, resulting in memory chips doubling and tripling in prices, according to the New York Times, right after Intel exited DRAM due to unprofitability. So, Intel's actions for 40 years have signaled the bottom. SGI, the graphics maker, commented at the time, quote, the exact
Outra máquina.
The profits the Japanese are making on the shortage are tremendous, and I'm sure they're plowing it right back into research, end quote. So it seems that, then, as now, the government stepped into something half-cocked and had the opposite impact to the objective. By 1986, Texas Instruments and Micron were the only American suppliers left, and Western media claimed Japanese producers acted as a cartel to drive remaining firms out. After the U.S. claimed Japan failed to open its home market, President Reagan imposed 100% tariffs on $300 million
Já o Reagan fazia estas brincadeiras.
in the form of a tax on American companies importing them.
As perhaps you've heard, last week I placed new duties on some Japanese products in response to Japan's inability to enforce their trade agreement with us on electronic devices called semiconductors.
Interestingly, Reagan acknowledged that tariffs are damaging...
Em 87.
...over the past year.
Now, imposing such tariffs or trade barriers and restrictions of any kind are steps that I am loath to take. And in a moment I'll mention the sound economic reasons for this, that over the long run such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer.
And Reagan...
Mas a diferença do Reagan é que ele sabia que isto causava problemas aos próprios americanos.
The Japanese companies were engaging in unfair trade practices, but you know, in imposing these tariffs, we were just trying to deal with a particular problem, not begin a trade war. So next week, I'll be giving Prime Minister Nakasone the same message. We want to continue to work cooperatively on trade problems and want very much to lift these trade restrictions as soon as evidence permits. We want to do this because we feel both Japan and the United States have...
Este talvez tenha sido o melhor presidente que os Estados Unidos tiveram.
As perhaps an interesting counterpoint to the past year's chaotic tariffs action,
E era ator.
overall seemed reluctant to keep these in place.
Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery. You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
Japan wasn't the only country with a competitive memory industry, though. South Korean suppliers joined the race next. An MIT research paper claims Samsung, LG, at the time Lucky Gold Star, and SK Hynix, at the time Hyundai, quote, invested $1.2 billion to enter the DRAM industry in 1984 to 1985, end quote. Stories of the time also bear resemblance to today. Quote, shortage of memory chips hurting video game makers, end quote, read a headline from LA Times on May 26, 1988. Quote, Nintendo of America has thinned out its game library. Sega of America has delayed introduction of some new video games, noting companies nervously watching a seemingly unlikely barometer, the availability of key computer memory chips, end quote. The publication noted SRAM shortages as impacting game makers, but also noted DRAM shortages impacting the computer industry. With shortages as the backdrop and Korean companies on the rise, Japan's lost decade began to dawn.
On the 29th of December 1989, the Nikkei, Japan's primary stock index, closed at a record high of 38,915, After accounting for inflation, it would never again reach this level. At this time, Japan was quickly becoming the preeminent economic force in the world. Its highly innovative companies were churning out world-class technology, investors were doubling or even tripling their money every other year, and all of this was creating some of the highest incomes anywhere on the planet. But even during these good times, there were problems bubbling away under the surface.
How Many Works' recap of Japan's lost decade talks about the economics, all deeply integrated with the trade war Reagan said he wanted to avoid. Now 1995, the New York Times, citing DataQuest, reported that the semiconductor market grew by 40%, largely driven by PC demand amidst the post-hoc named .com era. The article noted, quote, Asian suppliers outside of Japan showed the strongest growth last year, increasing their revenue to $18.7 billion in 95 from $9.8 billion in 94, end quote, representing around a 90% year-over-year increase for South Korean manufacturers. Then, in 1996, and under President Bill Clinton, after decades of trade conflicts, the U.S. and Japan reached a mutual agreement to support the global semiconductor trade.
Frankly, I'm elated that we got a semiconductor agreement. That is a very, very big issue, and very important for us because of the enormous comeback American industries had in that area.
Clinton also had a hand in reaching automotive manufacturing agreements with Japan in the same year. The explosive growth of 90s economy led to technological innovations that built the early gaming industry as well. Many of our viewers might fondly remember the 90s and early 2000s through at least 2003 as a golden era of the internet and gaming, before companies figured out how to min-max it all.
Perfeitamente, lembro perfeitamente. Computer Chronicles era o melhor programa que existiu.
This week on the Computer Chronicles, new generation PCs. It's time to rethink what a personal computer should be. Is the old typewriter metaphor a thing of the past? Today we'll look at several innovative approaches to the PC of the future. We'll show you Transphone, part telephone, part PC. Plus a sneak preview of the new low-cost internet computer from Oracle.
Now, there's a strange green monster over here from...
Olha, este senhor morreu agora ano passado, acho eu. Que estive à frente de uma das maiores sites também de informática, Gordon. Era um senhor, ok? A integridade dele era um senhor.
Just like cool style, Gordon, if you want.
Tive uma caixa destas.
Well, I think for the Alienware and also for the Falcon, gamers are hardcore PC people. They want people to know that they have pride in their ride. They don't want a Ford Taurus space box. They want, a Dodge Viper.
It's got to stand out.
It's got to stand out. You bring that to a party or a LAN party, which a lot of game people do, and people are going to give you some look.
Well said, Gordon. This booming electronics also stimulated fraudulent activity in the industry. Still 1996, the FTC prosecuted Synchronous Soft Corp, the company behind the widely used downloadable RAM.
Isto foi a maior palhaçada que existiu. Eu na altura não tinha direito à internet, né? Portanto, YouTube. Mas eu gozava com os meus colegas com isto. Para quem não conhece, até vou deixar ficar isto aqui. Se calhar Soft RAM, acho que era assim que se chamava, deixa eu ver. O nome técnico que eles tinham. Onde é que está? É Soft RAM 95. Soft RAM 95. Espera aqui. O que é que este software dizia? É que duplicava a tua RAM. Pelo amor de Deus. Vou ter que deixar ficar aqui, porque agora já não consigo encontrar aqui. Eu vou ter que fazer um...
In 1995, a company by the name of Synchronous...
mas eu vou fazer noutra parte, ok? Para vocês se rirem um bocadinho. Eles foram apanhados com as calças na mão e levaram uma punição do caraças daquela mesma instituição. Simplesmente era publicidade falsa, não é? Dizer que instalavas este software, tinhas 4 GB de RAM, passavas a ter 8. O software mostrava-te isso, mas era tanga, não é?
Soft RAM, charged for software misrepresentation. You might not download RAM, but SoftRAM claimed it could double it. This scam came at a time of squeeze for memory and elevated prices, opening the door for opportunity. DRAM became a marketing point. In a September 1996
PC Magazine, esta era a melhor revista que existia na altura, e acho que agora também já não sei, porque raramente agora vejo esta revista, porque era quando eu estava nas lajes, eu comprava os americanos lá onde podia, porque eles isso tinham, não é? As empresas mas o mercado europeu era muito difícil de vês esta revista, né? E as primeiras eram umas que querem que fosse listas telefónicas, era uma grossura do cara. Depois mudaram o sistema. 1996.
Magazine article we have, a Micron advertisement boasts, quote, now you get twice the memory in selected systems, end quote, highlighting 16 megabyte and 64 megabyte solutions. Now 1997, the U.S. International Trade Commission determined, quote, that there is a reasonable indication that an industry in the United States is materially injured by reason of imports from the Republic of Korea and Taiwan of static random access memory, end quote. In 1998, 12 NEC employees were arrested for overcharging the Japan Defense Agency on equipment contracts and illegally reducing the refund paid to the agency's central procurement office. The write-up notes the, quote, collapse of the bubble economy, end quote. The industry also underwent an extreme consolidation of manufacturers around this time.
A small computer chip is causing Texas Instruments to offer a voluntary retirement plan to 5,300 workers nationwide. The culprit, DRAMs, a memory chip that's being sold by more and more companies.
They are interchangeable in most systems. They are very much driven by a supply and demand situation, and that's why we've seen the kinds of price decreases over the last year.
A 17% drop in third quarter earnings is causing the company to offer early retirement. It's leaving many employees with a tough choice to make.
From 1996 to 2003, we started to see the results of what would eventually become known as the price-fixing scheme. Motorola, Matsushita, IBM, Oki, Fujitsu, and several other smaller firms abandoned the market. Texas Instruments discontinued its joint venture with Hitachi and formed Twinstar. Micron acquired Toshiba's U.S. operation and Texas Instruments' memory business. Siemens spun out its semiconductor business to Infineon. Hyundai acquired LG Semicon before restructuring to Hynix. Hitachi and NEC spun out their DRAM business and formed Alpida. Mitsubishi transferred its semiconductor business to Renesas, a joint venture with Hitachi. This amounted to a 40% reduction in DRAM manufacturers worldwide, as noted in the DRAM antitrust litigation's third amended federal complaint. Now, April 2002, with the grand jury investigation into price fixing to begin in June the same year, Michael Dell reportedly accused the DRAM suppliers of, quote, cartel-like behavior, end quote, and the Wall Street Journal's 2004 retrospective article on the events notes that Dell's comments triggered federal attention, noting a, quote, sharp across-the-board spike in memory prices, reversing a 2-year decline, end quote. The following month, Taiwanese manufacturer Mosel Vitalik told the Taipei Times, what we said earlier, quote, we're trying to encourage a price of $3. That's a consensus. You don't need to have a meeting, you just need to have a phone call. Everybody knows each other. We just said, try not to sell below $3, end quote. 1 month later, the DOJ began its investigation on the DRAM industry, bringing us to the price-fixing cartel period from 1998 to 2002. We'll start with the players. The biggest memory purchasers were PC OEMs like Dell, Apple, IBM, Gateway, Compaq, and so on. Naturally, they purchased the DRAM from the largest manufacturers, namely Samsung, Hynix, Micron, and Infineon, whom the court documents note, quote, controlled roughly 70% of the market, end quote. The additional 30% was composed of at least 10 other cartel co-conspirators, whom the DOJ apparently didn't consider big enough fish to fry. Although, to be fair...
Agora esse mercado passou a ser 95, era 70 e agora 95.
Consumers, back when Micron still sold to consumers, that is. Ads of the time mentioned that, quote, buying direct is crucial, end quote, offering a 100% guarantee of compatibility alongside a promise of lower prices. According to the filings, the suppliers typically sent OEMs an initial price proposal, either bi-weekly or monthly. These provided a baseline for the negotiations that occur in person, on the phone, or over email. Before the cartel, the OEMs were the ones who held the negotiating power. The New York Attorney General's office wrote, quote, until approximately 1998, when the conspiracy began, density-adjusted prices for DRAM generally declined over time. An important reason for this was that, while DRAM are complex and costly to manufacture, the chips do not differ significantly, regardless of who manufactures them. As a consequence, DRAM chips tend to be substitutable, one for another, what economists call a commodity product, end quote. And they also wrote, quote, as DRAM technology improved, manufacturers of computers and other electronic devices were able to cut the cost and improve the quality of their own products, effectively passing these improvements in DRAM price and performance along to consumers, end quote. And, of course, we can't have good things for consumers. All of this is true to today. Memory is not significantly different between brands, and it is a commodity. OEMs, quote, could and did threaten to shift business away from a particular DRAM manufacturer that it believed was pricing too aggressively, end quote. Also noted by the
Viva.
The manufacturers sought to reverse this dynamic in 1998 and take the power away from the OEMs. It achieved this through constant communication amongst competitors.
Mas aí há muito tempo, viva la fiesta. Talvez aqui a seca todo o esquema das... Ai, meu Deus. E vai ser dois vídeos, este e outro. Então olha, então só perdeste 49 minutos.
In other words, the competitors colluded rather than competing, enabling artificially elevated margins and higher prices for their customers. The first
sim, vai dizendo.
level of discussion was among the account managers of any given OEM. For
Eles fizeram alguma proposta?
IBM sales manager would talk to the IBM sales managers at Micron, Samsung, and so on before any of them submitted their price proposals. This occurred for every major OEM. The second type of communication occurred in the C-suites, where the lieutenants discussed longer-term supply and pricing objectives before authorizing their soldiers to enforce them. The conspiracy began in spring of 1998, after an SK Hynix VP submitted that all manufacturers...
Mas fizeram-te alguma proposta? Perguntaste? Porque se deixaste lá é porque deves ter gostado da proposta.
temporarily shut down production to stabilize prices. The proposal read, quote, if the plan is to work, all DRAM...
Mal seria se não estivesse tudo bem. Não venham eles agora com treta, não é? O computador estava a funcionar, não é? Mas pronto, isto também é uma parte que eles têm que verificar. Em 2 dias não ia estragar, digo eu. Atenção, não é?
DRAM makers must play fairly for the overall good of our industry. A rogue player can keep the DRAM business on thin ice, end quote. DRAM makers collaboratively chose not to expand production and in fact stopped it in order to maintain high prices. The manufacturers began sharing prices shortly thereafter. The earliest price exchange we found dates back to 1998 in April, when SK Hynix and Toshiba shared average OEM prices with each other. Micron and Samsung joined the conspiracy next, discussing plans to place a price floor on 64 megabit DRAM that same month. By September, they were...
Mas isso foi aquilo que eu te disse, porque o que eles têm a fazer é vão-te desvalorizar o teu PC, foi isso que eu disse, ok? Porque tu queres uma coisa mais cara, eles querem ganhar também uma percentagem nesse que é mais caro e querem desvalorizar o teu PC. Aí é que nós vamos ver quanto é que eles vão desvalorizar, estás a entender? Se eles fossem porreiros, ok? Eles não te deviam desvalorizar. Isso era a minha opinião, certo? Pronto. Mas acredito que eles vão desvalorizar. Agora ao quanto, não faço ideia. Vamos ver até onde é que chega a vontade deles.
Fujitsu, Hitachi, LG, Mitsubishi, NEC, Oki, and Texas Instruments had all exchanged pricing information, with more members joining in the years to come. Once united, the manufacturer's attention turned toward initiating price increases. An internal SK Hynix
amanhã já vais saber, se não há crise.
Document translated to English explained, quote,
olha, não te esqueças de hoje, aliás amanhã, abasteceres o teu carro já de combustível, não é? Porque segunda-feira, como vais ter que ir lá outra vez, segunda-feira já aumentam os preços, assim poupas nisso.
Most suppliers consent to the fundamental idea that price might have to be increased because the price difference is too big from the spot price, and assert that they will increase the price when exchanging information among competitors. However, nobody doesn't seem to want to initiate the price increase since they don't want to be criticized by their customers about the first move, end quote. Similarly, SK Hynix's IBM...
Não, é assim, é como eu te disse. Se o ideal era que eles não te desvalorizassem, ok? Porque ainda por cima, por ser tão pouco tempo de duração, e a não ser que tenhas criado algum risco com o computador, às vezes, acontece, tão poucos dias, mas, como eu digo, só amanhã é que vais saber.
Account manager told his superiors, quote, I talked to the IBM about the potential that we might want to raise prices to the $38 level. This was received poorly.
É assim,
IBM does not
por isso que eu estava a dizer, questão dos 2 dias de ginásio. Na altura tive uma cliente que comprou um computador para o filho, levou, e no mesmo dia o filho conseguiu dar cabo da fonte de alimentação. Porquê? Naquela altura as fontes de alimentação, ainda hoje aparecem algumas assim, tu podes escolher a voltagem atrás 110 a 220. Não sei se já reparaste se a tua fonte tinha ou não. Nem todas têm, mas algumas ainda hoje, 2026, podem ter essa opção. E o que é que o miúdo atrás fez? Resolveu pôr em 110. Ao ligar o computador à corrente, a corrente das casas aqui em Portugal é 220, deu logo um estouro. Pronto, aí já nem sequer a RMA tem, percebes? Portanto, o computador nem um dia tinha. Teve horas lá. Entendes? Acontece muita coisa.
And favorite supplier to lead the price up, end quote. The superior, again at SK Hynix, then spoke to a Samsung director before responding, quote, before you submit our final price as you suggested for the first part of April, please have a last-minute conversation with Samsung. They're saying that they will go with $38. If you can have Samsung lead the charge, you will follow Samsung's leadership, end quote. With Hynix allowing Samsung to initiate the price increases, other manufacturers were able to claim that they were simply following the leader to hide behind them, a common market tactic.
Sim, eles têm que fazer toda a sequência toda. Isso aí está tudo dentro do normal. É como eu digo, é o gerente normalmente que costuma fazer isso, que vai depois desvalorizar ou não desvalorizar o teu PC e fazer a diferença para o outro e vai dizer, olha, você tem que dar mais X. E depois tu aceitas ou não aceitas, estás a entender? Isso aí já é outra questão.
After enacting the first raises, the manufacturers committed to each other about future prices too, thus beginning the cycle. And it'd be a hard one to break, since even one detractor could be a risk for them all. Even the employees responsible for spot market sales engaged in the fraud. OEMs don't purchase from the spot market, but they could use lower spot prices as a negotiation tool for contract prices. So manufacturers artificially inflated those as well. Meanwhile, a year into the collusion, the US and Japan announced their mutual cooperation in antitrust investigations.
I'm very pleased that we have reached agreement under which Japan will take steps to deregulate and open its medical device, pharmaceutical, telecommunications, housing, and energy sectors, as well as agreements to enhance antitrust cooperation between our countries and make it easier for foreign companies to invest in Japan.
Then, SK Hynix's operating profit suddenly sank. Hynix fell from $513 billion of operating profit in 1999 to negative $1.2 billion in 2000, as described in the expert report of Roger Knoll. This precipitous drop allowed the first cracks in the foundation to show. Like the mob, other cartel members saw the fall of a boss as an opportunity to drive the company out of business in early 2001. Court documents read, quote, one purpose of the price cuts was to kill Hynix, end quote. In March, a report from Micron stated, quote, I also think now is the time to do everything in our power to make it very difficult for Hynix to get that so badly needed cash. This potentially weakens their position in the eyes of potential Hynix investors or bank bailout efforts, end quote. In June, an Infineon
é aquilo que eu te disse ontem. Enquanto não fores lá, eles já devem dizer a teu favor ou a favor deles, depois tu é que decides. Entendes? Eu, pessoalmente, pela diferença apenas daquele valor que fizemos, não sei se chegava aos 200 euros, o que era, justificava por aqueles vários fatores todos que eu te expliquei. Ok? O ideal é que tivesse sido ao mesmo preço, né? Agora até é interesse deles, porque é irem ganhar mais de 200 euros, não é? Porque se esse novo PC fosse igual em termos de preço, eles podiam não ter muito interesse nisso, estás a perceber?
Document regarding communication with Samsung claimed, quote, I talked with our friend Makoviak at Samsung. They want to kill Hynix and take their market share. They're ready to fight to drive prices down, intentionally. The next months might be horrible, end quote. Another email from SK Hynix read, quote, I had dinner with Samsung marketing guy yesterday. The guy clearly said that Samsung would kill Infineon with 256M DRAM. This means that Samsung will play 256 megabit DRAM without...
Olha, o teu amigo já apareceu aí hoje. A pensar que eu lhe tinha bloqueado, tenho mais que fazer. Eu só bloqueio isso no fim das lives, se acontecer alguma coisa.
Price guideline, end quote. Greed was starting to get the best of these companies. Throughout this sub-period, the larger players oversupplied the market at prices that weaker firms couldn't compete with. Frustrated with Samsung, Micron VP Mike Sadler sought to end the newly beginning price war in mid-2001. He met with all manufacturers' lieutenants seeking mutual supply reductions to stabilize prices. Samsung held out, ignoring the cartel's price guidelines as it continued pushing for market share. Ironically, Samsung's 2002 annual report claimed, quote, to be the best in a dynamic, challenging, hyper-competitive global landscape demands nothing less than an act of sheer will, to be willing to step ahead.
Claro que vendem.
End quote. An Al-Qaeda document reported Samsung refraining, saying, quote, a reliable source from Taiwan told them that there would be an unwritten understanding among all global DRAM producers, except Samsung, to cut production by 20% starting November, end quote. An Infineon report confirmed, quote, I talked to Dieter Makoviak from Samsung. Samsung will proceed to take market share and make life difficult for all weaker competitors, end quote. Infineon executives urged Samsung to end the price war, asking, quote, can't you guys finish this off, end quote, to which a Samsung executive responded, quote, unfortunately, we cannot stop this, but we are trying to show investors that there is no chance for Hynix to survive and them to return their money. That's all I can say in an email with a lot of exclamation points, end quote. One Alpida employee commented that the price changes, quote, are pretty much unrelated to true market forces. There is no organic reason for prices to increase, i.e. demand increases. This is purely supply control, end quote. Then, Samsung finally agreed to rejoin the fold in November, only after SK Hynix was saved by a $7 billion bailout from multiple state-backed banks. An email thread between Infineon and Samsung sales executives from that month read, Infineon, quote, you couldn't finish off Hynix and now
E eles até podem até ganhar dinheiro depois com o teu PC, porque entretanto como as memórias estão a subir de preço.
you guys don't have the courage to increase contract pricing. All in all, I'm not too impressed. So, if you don't mind, we will. Samsung, quote, let's talk by phone. Tell me where and when, and I will look into it, end quote. The same day, an Alpida employee reported that Samsung intended to raise prices for Dell. By the end of November, the cartel's control was restored, and they used that control immediately. The manufacturers successfully rigged Compact's online auction, quote, by not submitting bids or by submitting intentionally high prices, end quote, thus driving up DRAM prices. Loyola Consumer Law Review, citing the Dow Jones International News, reported that 128 megabit chip prices increased from around $1 in March to around $4.40 by the end of 2001. Nearly a 5x increase in about 8 months, similar to today. An internal Alpida message chain from January 2002 read, quote, give Lin a raise. He has single-handedly raised the DRAM price throughout the US and the world. Give a little credit to the boys in Seoul too, end quote. A Samsung executive affirmed that the dramatic rate of price increases was key to the manufacturer's advantage, saying the DRAM customers, quote, clearly never expected the supply base would stick together to bring the price up so quickly, end quote. Meanwhile, the capos directed their employees to not, quote, exact prices as competitors, and to, quote, please never making statement in email that you spoke with competition. Lawyers love these babies.
Eu disse logo no outro dia que para fazer aqueles valores é sempre o gerente a assumir e a dizer, ok, é sempre assim. E não sei até se ele não tem que contactar com a loja central, não faço ideia como é que está agora as regras.
End quote, as reported by the Chicago Tribune and KIVI-TV. Manufacturers also lied about what was affecting prices during the collusion. In September 1999, a Samsung VP told Electronic News that the supply shortage was due to, quote, PCs entering the market at extraordinary numbers, end quote. It wasn't, but that's what they told the media, and that's what the media reported to the public. Surely, we've learned our lessons of artificial demand, and that wouldn't happen again. In December 2001, Micron CEO
Essa loja aí do Porto tem sempre muita gente lá, porque normalmente as lojas nas cidades grandes têm sempre muita gente, clientes lá na hora.
said he had, quote, no idea, end quote, why DRAM prices suddenly increased, before citing seasonal impacts on demand, blaming the Japanese manufacturers for cutting production, and pointing to Hynix temporarily closing one of their fabs. In April 2002, SK Hynix claimed that increased demand was the reason behind its increased revenue. Unfortunately for the manufacturers, the cartel's actions would soon come to light. In June 2002, the DOJ began investigating the DRAM industry. Micron quickly announced its cooperation in exchange for immunity.
Esta foi a primeira porrada que os gajos levaram-se.
Within days, Samsung...
730 milhões. 730 milhões que estas empresas levaram. Samsung Electronics, a Hynix e a Infineon. Lá por aquela empresa do Departamento dos Estados Unidos. Por esquemas de cartel, ok? Mas já é a segunda fase, ok? Não, são lojas da Global, são lojas muito grandes, percebes?
Thanks to their former cartel collaborator, now turned snitch.
The $300 million criminal fine that Samsung has agreed to pay is the second largest fine in the history of the Antitrust Division. Samsung and its co-conspirators fixed the price of DRAM used...
Pagou e não bufou 300 milhões de dólares. Só a Samsung.
Well, the conspiracy was relatively sophisticated. I think it was one that was not easy for customers to see. There were telephone conversations. Once we got into it, as I indicated, we do have company emails that tended to document or confirm some of these conversations. But from the outside, it's not immediately clear how obvious it would have been.
Over the course of the next 5 years, the US DOJ found Samsung, SK Hynix, Infineon, and Al-Qaeda guilty of price fixing between 1998 and 2002, finding them a collective $750 million. At least 117 employees were involved, and 15 of 18 charged individuals were convicted. In his expert testimony, Roger G. Knoll explained how collusion is more likely to succeed if the sellers consist of, quote, a large enough share of the market, the industry is, quote, sufficiently concentrated, unquote, with high entry barriers, products are substitutes, and, quote, if sellers have no means for directly sharing the excess profits from a particular sale, the sellers must expect that their collusion will cover a large enough number of separate transactions so that each will obtain a large enough share of sales at super competitive prices to make continuing collusive behavior more profitable than using the information to undercut the prices of competitors in order to capture a much larger market share, end quote. And finally,
não, força, eu é que estou a fazer este documentário, também estou mais calmo, estás a perceber? À vontade, meu. Vai correr tudo bem, amanhã vais ter uma boa surpresa, ok? Vai correr tudo bem. É preciso ter pensamento positivo, ok?
quote, in some cases, the institutional environment that the industry operates in, including government regulatory and trade policies, can facilitate collusion, end quote. Naturally, he found all of those factors present between 98 and 2002. Not only do all of those factors remain true today, but the industry is
abração. Continuação, bom resto de noite.
More consolidated. Manufacturers make up a larger market share, and the barriers to entry have risen significantly. The cartel aftermath consisted of several lengthy legal proceedings. Additionally, while Micron had amnesty from the DOJ's prosecution, it wasn't protected from the class action lawsuits that ensue for the next decade or so. The class of direct DRAM purchasers, meaning those who purchased modules directly from the manufacturers, excluding government entities, reached a $406 million settlement in 2006, according to Hagen's Berman law firm. By today's standards of inflation, that'd be around $780 million. In 2010, a $173 million settlement was approved for 33 states and private plaintiffs. At this point, we're getting into a major ramping period for GN's hardware coverage, and by 2014, we reported on a $310 million settlement granted for the class of indirect RAM purchasers. This was for anyone who purchased a product with DRAM inside of it. At the time, 12 years ago, I wrote, quote, the $310 million has been split between Samsung at $113 million, Micron at $66.77, Hynix at $50 million, and the rest trailing. It's estimated that consumers will see about 2/3 of the total settlement, end quote.
You may be eligible for a cut of a settlement reached with a computer chip company.
Se fosse nos Estados Unidos,
$10 million settlement with major manufacturers of DRAM computer chips. Companies face claims of price fixing. Anyone who bought a computer printer, video game console, or other electronic device between 1998
MP3,
We have a link to the code form on our website, 7news.com, under See It on TV.
Other countries followed with their own investigations. The EU reached a €331 million settlement in 2010, and Brazil imposed fines up to 7 million Brazilian real on manufacturers in 2016. After the DRAM investigation, the DOJ launched a subsequent probe into SRAM, eventually leading to another class action settlement of over $25 million in 2010, and two separate $33 million and $6 million settlements from Samsung and Cypress in 2011. The filings alleged similar violations to the DRAM litigation, but the manufacturers denied any wrongdoing as a standard part of a settlement agreement. In some of these situations, it took over 10 years for anyone to see a dime returned from the wrongdoing. Proof again that if the proceeds of the crime are greater than the fine, it's not punishment. It's just the cost of doing business. The FTC, Bureau of Competition, also pursued legal action against Rambus, who concealed owning patents that it convinced JEDEC members to incorporate into industry-wide standards.
In the critical technology arena, in February of 2007, the Commission issued a final opinion and order finding that technology developer Rambus Inc. had unlawfully monopolized the markets for 4 computer memory technologies that had been incorporated into industry standards for DRAM chips. And we required Rambus to license its SDRAM and DDR SDRAM technologies according to maximum allowable royalty rates. This is the Commission's first litigated case in the standard setting area, and we believe the first time in 22 years that the Commission has heard a monopolization case in administrative litigation.
And now we get to basically the modern era. As for the extreme consolidation the industry has undergone,
acho que eles têm que começar a investigar isto.
At any given point in time. In 1994, the three largest were Samsung, NEC, and Hitachi, who held 35% market share together. 2 years into the cartel, the three manufacturers' mutual share jumped to 72%, a feat not achieved again until 2010. Between 2002 and 2012, Micron, Hynix, Al-Qaeda, and Infineon, eventually Qimonda, all battled for second and third place. Samsung was the only manufacturer with greater than 25% market share up until Qimonda's insolvency in 2009, and Micron's 100% acquisition of Al-Qaeda in 2012 granted SK Hynix and Micron the achievement in 2013 and 2014. Qimonda went on to have its technology patents acquired by Chinese manufacturer CXMT, which now holds around 5% of the market, We talked about those patents and what they enabled for CXMT in our documentary titled The Rise of Chinese Memory on the channel. Since then, the Big Three's collective market share hasn't dipped below 91% in an absurd consolidation of power. The scheme worked. This table shows some of the remnants.
Já é isso que eu estou a dizer. Eles têm que acabar com isto.
Attorney General for the Antitrust Division, Bill Barr, expressed disbelief at, quote, corporate cultures of compliance, end quote, regarding senior managers who, quote, refused to accept responsibility for their crimes, end quote. He continued on to say, quote, if any company continues to employ such individuals in positions of substantial authority, or in positions where they can continue to engage directly or indirectly in collusive conduct, or in positions where they supervise the company's compliance and remediation programs, or in positions where they supervise individuals who would be witnesses against them, we will have serious doubts about the company's commitment to implementing a new compliance program or invigorating an existing one, end quote. Yes, strong words, but serious doubts, unfortunately, don't actually do anything and aren't a legal action. So this means nothing. Several price-fixing participants remained in their high-ranking positions long after...
Isto para mim nem vale a pena. Nem vale a pena. Perdemos tempo com isso.
Our technology and corporate structure have grown significantly, but not to the detriment of the company culture, end quote. It's funny, you'd think someone who has such a big achievement as being part of literally one of the largest DOJ busts in history would lay claim to that, but they forgot to mention it. It's actually almost romantic how he reminisces about the racketeering era, but we're reassured that SK Hynix's growth hasn't affected its culture, which, I mean, really, if you read into that, means that they would do the same thing again today. There have also been several unsuccessful lawsuits alleging collusion in more recent years. Maybe the companies have gotten better at hiding it or getting out from under it, though. According to Reuters, in 2017, China's National Development and Reform Commission, or NDRC, began a new investigation on price fixing in the DRAM industry. The following year, the Financial Times reported that Wu Jianguo, China's anti-monopoly bureau lead, claims, quote, the anti-monopoly investigation into these three companies has made important progress. It has yielded massive evidence, end quote. In 2018, Hagens Berman filed a new lawsuit against the DRAM manufacturers after winning its previous one, alleging they'd conspired to artificially inflate prices from June 2016 to February 2018, citing simultaneous changes in supply and pricing behavior, price and supply signaling through public statements, and supply discipline against the manufacturer's self-interest, among other factors.
South Korea's Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix are facing a legal fight in the United States, as an American law firm, Hagens Berman, has filed a suit against them for price fixing. The U.S. law firm filed a suit at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, alleging that Samsung, Hynix and Micron have conspired to artificially limit the supply of DRAM chips to keep prices high. Local experts refute those allegations. They insist there was not price fixing and the cost was determined by supply and demand.
The complaint also claimed that the manufacturer's conduct changed after Samsung entered into a memorandum of understanding with the NRDC, resulting in Samsung agreeing to increase supply. The case was ultimately denied due to lack of evidence. In 2021, the law firm submitted an updated complaint, even citing one of our own at GN previous RAM price reports that we put together in 2018. Patrick, named in this one in the footnotes, who actually for that report worked with me to build software to scrape prices so we could catalog them. Although, unfortunately for the law firm, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ultimately reaffirmed the dismissal in 2022. Finally, we reach our final decade of coverage, 2017 through 2025. Corruption in the DRAM industry has picked up significantly in the last decade, largely fueled by the ongoing trade war between the US and China, which Micron has found itself a party to, and by AI demand driving abuse of the public's taxpayer dollars to be redirected to DRAM companies for private use. The public doesn't get that money back in the form of affordable consumer products, but the mega corporations certainly benefit. Meanwhile, government legislation gives Micron billions of dollars in tax breaks on things like property taxes in states that are notoriously difficult to buy homes in for normal people. While Micron benefits from tax breaks and government relief, it funnels money straight into the Trump administration via donations. The difference is that this time, much of the corruption is between the government and the AI companies, not necessarily between the multiple memory companies, but there's still some of that too. We'll get to that. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted China's Fujian Jinhua, Taiwan's UMC, and 3 individuals, charging them with conspiracy to commit economic espionage, among other charges, and stating,
in 2015, China committed publicly that it would not target American companies for economic gain. Obviously, that commitment has not been met. Just ask GE Aviation or Trimble of Sunnyvale, California. So today, I am announcing another economic espionage case against Chinese interests. And before I do that, I want to remind everyone that defendants in this case, as in every case...
Treta.
Comes to China's activities here, there are times they will abide by our law, there are times they will bend the law or operate in gray areas, and there are times they will break the law. The bottom line is they
administration saying, quote, the review found that Micron's products have serious network security risks, which pose significant risks to China's critical information infrastructure supply chain, CEO explained.
Very nasty about this to Micron.
The White off the quote validated end user authorizations list for claims that an SK
que nem vale a pena, acho que portanto eu vou fazer o vídeo todo, não é? Vou fazer o vídeo todo. Vocês vejam depois o vídeo do Gamers Next também, porque é uma maneira de lhe dar também créditos. Eu vou pôr aqui o outro que eu gostava aqui à espera também, que foi o próprio Trump. Isto foi, estão a ver aqui, estão a ver, 21/1/2026. Tinha dito que ia impor uma tarifa de 100% nas RAMs, a não ser que tu vás fazer na América. Isso não muda nada. A RAM pode ainda ficar pior com a nova ameaça grave. O governo estadounidense, através do Departamento de Comércio, sinalizou que pode criar uma nova tarifa de importação 100% sobre fabricantes RAM. A medida visa forçar a produção de chips em solo americano. Como a Micron fez, não é? 2030 é que acaba de produzir aquilo. Pelo amor de Deus, quer dizer, se a ameaça se concretizar, 2026 será um ano ainda mais difícil, porque quem desejar montar um PC pode fazer upgrade, ou fazer um upgrade. A Micron é uma das grandes players única americana. Aí não se esquecer, a Micron já não vai vender memórias para nós. Ok? Eles só vão fazer memórias para a inteligência artificial. Ai, meu Deus, meu Deus, meu Deus. Portanto, está ali tudo. Eu acho um bocado surreal. Pelo menos o Estado americano ainda fez alguma coisa, que foi ir atrás destes gajos já há anos que isso aconteceu. Só que eu continuo a dizer, as multas que aplicam nestas situações acaba sempre por compensar o pessoal que pratica estes atos. Não será possível, não será possível. Tinham que ir de funcionar de outra maneira. Ou a multa ia ser muito grande, ou então começarem a aplicar coisas de que, pronto, você está nessa empresa, você não vai poder sair durante 10 anos. Não há outra maneira, mas enfim. Maltinha, foi aqui o cartel das DRAM. Tem aqui episódios de uns anos, há quase 20 anos para cá que aconteceu isso. Portanto, muitos problemas. Ok? Muito obrigado, continuação, e até uma próxima. Fui.